I sat in my corner office on the 32nd floor, looking out over Boston. That view used to feel like an accomplishment, a symbol of what I'd built over 15 years in structural engineering. I was trained to spot the smallest issues in a building's framework, to understand that even a minor crack could become a major problem. Lately, though, it wasn't just buildings that seemed to have cracks. It was my life, and the signs weren't so easy to ignore. I was staring at some new charges on Emily's credit card statement when my assistant's voice buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Thompson, the contractors from the Berkshire site are here to see you." I minimized the browser and took a deep breath, reminding myself to keep calm. I didn't want my suspicions to get in the way of the meeting. "Send them in," I replied, keeping my tone steady. I knew these contractors well, or so I thought. Mike Reeves, the foreman, walked in with two of his men. He shuffled some papers nervously, and I could tell something was off. "Mr. Thompson, we had to make some changes to the plans," he started, avoiding eye contact. "Material costs have gone up, and with the new specifications, well, we're looking at about $40,000 in extra costs." I leaned back in my chair, studying Reeves. "And where did these new specs come from?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "James Mitchell, the real estate agent." My patience wore thin. James Mitchell was no structural engineer, and he certainly didn't have the right to make changes to my design. That was my job, and everyone knew it. I was the one responsible for the building's integrity, and any misstep could ruin everything. The meeting wrapped up with Reeves promising to send revised quotes. But as they left, I sat back, uneasy. This wasn't the first time these contractors had tried to cut corners. 3 major shortcuts in just the last month had been flagged, each one a risk that could have compromised the entire building. It didn't sit well with me, but I put it aside. Later that evening, instead of heading home, I drove straight to the townhouse in Beacon Hill that Emily and I shared. She had texted earlier, saying, "Emergency with the Carlton account. Don't wait up. Love you." Her texts had become predictable, almost rehearsed. The house felt different now, filled with memories that seemed to fade the more I learned. Had I been so distracted that I missed what was going on right in front of me? When I walked into my home office, I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off, organizing old paperwork. It was something Emily had been oddly eager for me to handle. In fact, she'd even hired a professional organizer last month, saying it was time to clear out the clutter. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had a different reason for wanting me to go through all this. As I sorted through stacks of documents, my hand brushed against a leather-bound book. It wasn't one of my old engineering journals. In fact, it was a diary, Emily's, from years back. The early entries brought back memories. September 15th, 2020. "Mark surprised me with Hamilton tickets tonight. I can't believe how lucky I am to have him. He's always thinking ahead, planning for our future." I remembered that night, how happy she'd seemed. Reading it, I felt a pang of nostalgia. But as I flipped through the pages, things took a darker turn. April 15th, 2022. First meeting with James Mitchell about vacation properties today. He's everything Mark isn't. Spontaneous, passionate, alive. When he showed me the lakefront listings, his hand brushed mine. And I felt more in that moment than I have in years of Mark's careful planning. That was when the reality of it hit me. She wasn't just meeting with him for business. She was describing emotions, moments shared that I hadn't been part of in a long time. As I kept reading, the entries became more frequent, more detailed. May 3rd, 2022. James understands me in ways Mark never has. We spent hours talking about dreams, about escape. He thinks I'm wasting my talent, playing the dutiful wife. Says with my PR skills and his real estate connections, we could build an empire. Every word dug deeper, revealing plans I'd never known about. She wrote about their meetings at a lake house owned by a man named David, who had been helping them keep everything hidden. David, another so-called friend. In her words, June 20th, 2022, David's lake house is perfect for our meetings. James brings champagne, and we plan our future while watching the sunset. I dropped the diary, feeling numb. She'd woven an entire life behind my back, while I'd been here, in this same house, thinking we were building something together. Every decision she'd made in the past 2 years had been part of a larger plan, a calculated betrayal I hadn't seen coming. Just then, I heard a knock on my office door. When I turned, there was David, the very friend I'd read about, standing there in a perfectly pressed suit. "Hey buddy, thought I'd drop by and see how things were coming along with the house plans." I motioned him in, struggling to keep my voice steady. Perfect timing. I was just reviewing some notes. He loosened his tie and settled into a chair across from me, all smiles, completely unaware of what I now knew. "Finding everything in order?" he asked. "Interesting choice of words," I replied. He glanced at the desk, noticing the open diary. His expression shifted just a little, a flicker of recognition. I stayed calm, watching as he scrambled for an excuse and made his exit. As he walked out, I looked out over the Boston skyline. The game had already begun. They just didn't know it yet. That night, instead of heading to bed, I sat down at my desk, Emily's diary open in front of me. Each page was another gut punch. She wasn't just meeting James Mitchell for a business deal. She was meeting him at restaurants and lake houses, sharing moments, dreams, even plans for a life that didn't include me. And it wasn't just her. She had a whole crew. Emily's sister Emma, who I once thought had my back, was helping her gather dirt on me for a divorce case. The way Emily had framed me in her diary, you'd think I was a controlling tyrant, obsessed with money and my career, blind to everything else. I couldn't believe it. Emma, with her legal connections, was setting everything up for Emily. Her friends, her so-called client meetings at the lake, her constant urging for me to clear out old stuff. They all had a reason now. She was building a case against me, and I'd never seen it coming. As I read through more of Emily's diary, one entry stopped me cold. March 1st, 2024. Mike thinks he's building our dream home, spending his savings and inheritance on it. He has no idea he's actually financing our escape. It felt like a punch to the gut. That house I'd been working on, thinking it was going to be a place for us, was actually going to be their ticket out. They'd even arranged for the contractors to overcharge me, with the extra going right into Emily and James's pockets. All these months, I thought I was building something for us, and they'd been playing me like a fool. Just then, a knock on my office door snapped me out of it. David, my longtime friend, stood in the doorway. He looked as calm as ever in his tailored suit, but to me, he was no longer the friend I once trusted. "Hey, thought I'd check on the progress for the house," he said, giving me a friendly nod. I motioned him in, keeping my face blank. "Perfect timing," I replied. "I was just looking over the contractor quotes." He settled in, loosening his tie. Not a worry in the world. "Everything looking good?" he asked, glancing around the room. I noticed his gaze flicker to the diary lying on the desk. I kept my face calm, studying him as he tried to appear relaxed. "The support beams seem creative," I replied, keeping my voice even. David chuckled, shrugging it off. "Construction costs are just wild these days." His eyes were darting between me and the diary on the desk. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, but then he just got up and made an excuse to leave. I watched him go, his confident stride a bit shakier than usual. Later, I went to a dinner Emily's sister Emma was hosting, celebrating her new promotion to junior partner at a prestigious law firm. I was barely paying attention, my mind focused on everything I'd uncovered. Emma was radiant, chatting away, with Emily by her side, both of them putting on their best, loving family act. But I noticed everything now, the little glances between Emily and James, the way Emma kept probing about my work and our finances. She even asked me with a casual smile, "So, you must be proud of the Berkshire house, Mike. Emily tells me you're really sticking to the budget." Emily reached out, touching my arm with a look of concern. "Honey, you've hardly touched your wine. Is everything okay at work?" Her voice was smooth, practiced, like nothing was wrong at all. I glanced over as James entered the room. He'd arrived late, looking freshly tanned, probably from his weekend at David's lake house. The PR conference Emily had claimed was so crucial. Everything fit together now. I raised my glass and gave them a tight smile. "Everything's fine," I replied. "Just thinking about the future." They all clinked their glasses to my toast, each one completely unaware that I now held the upper hand. The truth was, I had their secrets in my pocket, literal proof of every betrayal, every scheme, and every lie. And they hadn't the slightest idea. That night, after Emily claimed another last-minute work emergency and headed out, I made 2 calls. The first was to Angela Chan, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a construction fraud case. The second was to Michael Jang, my old college roommate and now a cybersecurity specialist. If Emily and her crew thought I'd just roll over, they were about to get a rude awakening. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch them get away with this. They thought I was too focused on my job, too trusting to see the truth. They never guessed that the same attention to detail that kept buildings standing strong would also spot the cracks in their scheme. Their biggest mistake wasn't just betraying me. It was underestimating me. I stared out over the Boston skyline that night, feeling a calm resolve settle in. Tomorrow, I'd start pulling their world apart piece by piece. For now, I'd play my role. After all, Emily wasn't the only one who knew how to act. The next day, I found myself in Angela Chan's office. Her place overlooked the Boston harbor, with everything set up in a clean, minimalist way that suited her. Angela didn't waste time. She was focused, professional. As she went through Emily's financial records, her frown deepened. "They didn't even try to hide it," she said, flipping a page for me to see. "Your wife's been moving money into a private account, disguising it as PR firm expenses." She pointed to the screen where transaction after transaction was highlighted. "How much are we talking about here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Almost $200,000 over the past year and a half," Angela replied, shaking her head. She pointed to more charges disguised as business expenses at David's restaurant. David's been helping her move the money through his place. These supposed corporate events were just a cover. I felt a mix of anger and relief. At least now, I had concrete proof. Angela handed me a USB drive. "It's all here. Enough to get the IRS interested, too. They won't look kindly on David's creative bookkeeping." From there, I drove to meet Michael Jang, my old college buddy and cybersecurity expert. He greeted me at his office and wasted no time pulling up Emily's digital records. "She's been using a hidden email account and encrypted messages to send James everything," he said, bringing up screenshots. "Bank statements, schedules, investment accounts. She's documented everything." He clicked through the files, each one another piece of her betrayal. "Emma's part in this?" I asked, bracing myself. Michael nodded, pulling up a folder. "Emma's been gathering evidence to build a divorce case against you. She's even got witness statements from David, saying you were controlling and aggressive." He shook his head. "None of it's true, obviously, but they've been spinning every conversation to make you look bad." "What about James?" I asked. Michael grinned. "Got him too. He's been using his client database to identify properties for their little empire, and that's not exactly legal. Plus, I found plenty of communication with the contractors. They're in on the scam, charging you extra and splitting the profits with James." With all this evidence in hand, I felt like I finally had control again. They'd thought they were smart, that I'd never see it coming. But now, the pieces were all in place, and I was ready to make my move. A week later, Emma asked to meet for lunch. She started off with a concerned look, telling me she'd noticed some patterns in my behavior and felt obligated to speak up. I hit the record button on my phone. Legally, since we were in a public place. "Patterns?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Yes," she said, leaning in like she was genuinely worried. "Emily has felt restricted financially, and David has mentioned some concerning behavior from you." "Is that so?" I replied. "Funny, because I've noticed some patterns too, like the fake reports and fabricated witness statements you've been collecting." I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the table. Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice was shaking. "Sure you do," I said. "I have copies of everything you and Emily have been planning, even your emails about building a case for divorce." Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced down, her brother's name lighting up the screen. I stood up and left her sitting there, her so-called plans unraveling in front of her. That evening, Emily was unusually affectionate, asking if everything was okay. She tapped out a message on her phone under the table, probably to James. I kept my face neutral, just watching her. She had no idea her entire scheme was falling apart. The next day, the dominoes started to fall. Emma's law firm held a meeting to discuss ethical concerns after I'd sent them proof of her false reports. By evening, she was out of a job, her law career in shambles. James faced his own reckoning. His firm's ethics committee called him in over his fraudulent property deals and contractor kickbacks. David's restaurant didn't escape either. IRS agents showed up for a full audit, unraveling years of creative accounting. Emily was still blissfully unaware, thinking her plan was in place. She called me that afternoon, her voice frantic. "Mike, there's something wrong with our accounts. I can't access anything, and I can't reach James. What's going on?" I stayed calm. "Sounds stressful, Emily. Maybe you should call a crisis management team." "Oh, wait, aren't you on indefinite leave?" The silence on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. She tried to explain, her voice shaky, but I just hung up. Later that day, a courier delivered divorce papers to Emily's office, along with a letter from me. In it, I'd included copies of her diary entries and all the financial records, making it clear I knew every detail of her betrayal. Around her, the phones were ringing off the hook as news of her financial scandal spread. Her reputation was shot, her world crumbling faster than she could control. From my office, I watched it all play out, knowing that I'd finally regained control. It wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about showing them that the trust they'd taken for granted had become their undoing. They'd built a plan. Sure, but they never expected I'd tear it down piece by piece. As the sun set over Boston, I sat back, feeling lighter than I had in years. They'd gambled everything on my supposed blindness. Now, I was free. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd get cheated on. I mean, I work hard. I'm a decent guy. I guess I was just too trusting. They thought I was a pushover, someone they could walk all over. But I showed him. I fought back. I gathered all the proof I could find. Bank statements, emails, even a secret diary. It wasn't easy, but I did it. And when I had enough, I struck. I exposed their lies, their greed, their whole rotten scheme. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. I wanted to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. And I did. I ruined their plans, their careers, their lives. They thought they were smart, but they were wrong. I was smarter. Now, I'm starting over. I'm building a new life, a better life. I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to let anyone take advantage of me again. I'm stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. I remember the day I found out. I was going through some old papers when I stumbled upon Emily's diary. At first, I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a whole different world, a world I didn't know existed. She'd been cheating on me for years, with my best friend, no less. I felt betrayed, angry, and heartbroken. I wanted to lash out, to hurt them back. But I knew that wasn't the answer. I had to be smarter, stronger. I had to take control of the situation. So, I started digging. I hired a private investigator, a forensic accountant, and a cybersecurity expert. They helped me piece together the puzzle, to see the full extent of the betrayal. It was a lot to take in. They'd been stealing from me, lying to me, planning my downfall. I decided to fight back, but not in the way they expected. I didn't want to stoop to their level. I wanted to expose them, to show the world who they really were. I filed for divorce, I reported them to the authorities, and I even started a foundation to help others who had been victims of similar crimes. It wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to give up, but I kept going, driven by a sense of justice and a desire to rebuild my life. I found a new job, a new apartment, and even a new love interest. The people who betrayed me paid a heavy price. Their reputations were ruined, their careers were destroyed, and they were left with nothing. It was a fitting end to their scheme. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned to trust my instincts, to be careful who I let into my life, and to never give up. I've also learned that revenge isn't always the best answer. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply moving on and living a happy, fulfilling life.